All right, so just a reminder for everyone, if you would like to answer, you can always raise your hand and unmute, or you can use the chat box if your mic is not available. Okay, in the past discussions, we have talked about reading, right, and English for academic purposes, the differences between general English as well as academic English and all that. Now, this time we are going to talk about one particular skill that is often overlooked, and that is listening. So, again, before we begin, I'd like to ask about your ideas regarding listening. In your opinion, can you tell me why listening is important? Or if in your opinion, listening isn't that important, I'd like to know why. According to Gurley, listening is important for it is one of the main components of communicating. According to Pamela, to listen, we need to make a conscious effort not to just hear what people are saying, but to take it in, digest it, and understand. So, meaning to say, uh, it is not such a simple process, right? Next to that, my second question would be, what are the difficulties you encounter when you are listening? What problems do you encounter when you are using listening? All right, Tasneem mentions noises. Noise. What sort of noise are you pertaining to, Tasneem? Can you give us an example? Okay, for others, no, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in some of your classes, when someone is unmuting, there might be noises from roosters, no? Animal sounds. There are dogs barking. Okay, according to Girly, there are problems like, apart from noise, there are also issues on misunderstandings. Tasnim mentions in particular, he's talking about people talking in the background. All right. Thank you for your answers. And last question. In your opinion, what's the difference between hearing and listening? How do these two things differ? Are these two even different? Are they the same? All right. Girly on the chat box mentions that hearing is the nature of the ears, which is picking up sounds, and listening refers to focusing on one particular sound. Meaning to say, for Girly, hearing is just recognizing the sounds around us, no? Whereas listening, there is focus involved. Okay, let's try to check the following slides to understand why listening is important. Let's answer the questions posted in the previous slide. Why is listening important? Well, first of all, listening helps us to stay focused on the message being sent. It helps us in our comprehension and may improve or at least maintain our relationships with other people. So, in order to maintain those relationships, it is important that we do not only share information, but we also listen to the speaker. Next, it is the most basic kind of communicating activity that we do daily. How basic is it? Well, according to Ang in 2009, he is a researcher, we spend 45% of our time listening, and that 90% of the information we gather are retained and received through our eyes and ears. Okay, so that's almost half of our time, uh, which is spent in listening. In his studies, it is mentioned that the level of our listening effectiveness is only about 50%, meaning to say that we do not receive and understand the entirety of the message. And in terms of understanding that particular message, there is a sort of a limit in our capacity to listen effectively. It's only at 50%. Let's further differentiate hearing and listening. All right, just like what you've mentioned a while ago, when we say hearing, okay, it's the plain act of receiving sounds. You just recognize the different sounds, no? That's hearing. When we say listening, it is a more complex process, okay, which makes use of our sensory experiences or our background knowledge, not just to recognize sounds, but rather to interpret spoken or verbal language in order to satisfy a particular need. Okay? Listening involves focus, listening involves understanding, hearing not necessarily. Further difference of hearing versus listening. First, hearing, it is a natural process of receiving oral and visual stimuli. It is a passive phase of speech reception. Okay, not active but passive. Good hearing is it needed for effective listening, meaning to say hearing is also a part of listening. And good hearing is not synonymous to good listening. So just because you have good hearing doesn't necessarily mean that you're a good listener. When it comes to listening, it's more than hearing in the sense that it is a skill that needs to be developed. It is a skill that can be improved. Listening is the active phase of speech reception, okay? Because it involves your focus. When you listen, you are engaged. Listening is a sub-process of communication that involves not only hearing. Hearing isn't the only thing that's happening when you listen, because when you listen, you also need to understand and remember whatever it is that you are hearing. Why is listening important? All right. Now, in the previous discussions, we've talked about uh, intercultural communication, in which we emphasize that a lot of us come from different backgrounds. Even if right now in this class, most of us might be Filipino, no? Still, since we come from different locations, we come from different provinces, ages, gender, all of those contribute in our interpretation of a certain message. It's the same with listening. So all of those things, all of those aforementioned things also contribute in our listening skills. In order to be a good communicator, you must be aware of different reasons why a sound can have different meanings to different people. So a certain sound can have a different interpretation when presented to different people. So understanding much about listening can often help in building social relationships, determine traits of people, perform professional duties, and many more. Okay? Listening is important in short. Okay, another question for the class. How do you usually feel when people do not listen to you? Right? How do you usually feel when people do not listen to you, when your opinions are ignored? According to Jan Marley, he feels useless. All right. For Ritzy, she feels sad. So, meaning to say, even though listening can be an active or a passive process, no, it has an effect with people around us. It can affect our mood. Okay, so we will see more about that in a bit. Let's talk about the different models of listening. So there are two models. the active and passive. In active listening, effort is required. May effort. The listener should concentrate on what is being said. That's why it's called active. There is sort of a presence of mind that is required. It demands your full attention and concentration so you can understand the message. Meaning to say, if you do not give your full attention, there is a chance that you might misunderstand the message. There are two categories in active listening. The first one is the critical or persuasive listening. When we say critical or persuasive listening, it involves understanding the message based on evidence or proof presented by the speaker or sender to prove their point. It leads to reflective thinking or thinking that requires to inquire and investigate on the values, right? When we say critical or persuasive listening, the point is when you're presented with information, when you listen, you do not just accept information, that there is evaluation, okay, that you do in order to check or to assess if the message is true. When we say reflective thinking, it hinders you from automatically agreeing with the speaker in the sense that, as stated over here, all right, while you are listening, you are evaluating the proof that is presented to you, which is why it's called critical or persuasive listening. There is evaluation involved. Assessment. The second one is what we call discriminative or instructional listening, in which we listen to derive information, facts, ideas, and principles. Okay, so what's this kind of listening? This kind of listening is important to determine the differences of ideas, to look into the condition or state of the object of the talk in order to get instructions or information. So basically, your objective when you are using discriminative or instructional listening is to gather information. This is often used in class discussions like what we're having right now, in business meetings and conferences where you hear people discuss their observations, opinions, feelings, and thoughts about the things that interest them. And then you, as a listener, okay, you try to gather as much information as you can. Those are the two categories of active listening. Okay? The second one is called passive listening. So unlike active listening, passive listening doesn't require as much effort. Okay? It does not rely on focus or effort. And then it usually happens when you do something else while listening. All right, quick question for the class. What are the things that, or rather, what examples can you give me? Now, give me an example situation in which you use passive listening. What are the things that you usually do while you're listening to something else? I'll give an example. For me, I usually use passive listening when I am preparing these presentations. So while I am typing, I am listening to a radio program or a podcast. How about you? All right. For Ritzy, while she is sketching, she is listening to music. Is that correct? All right. For Girly Ang Tangko, reading a book while in class. All right. I'd say reading a book while in class since it involves understanding the message kasi no, so that could fall in active listening pa rin. All right. For Charlotte, when studying while listening to a podcast. Okay, those are examples of passive listening. So good examples. Next. All right. Another example is when you listen to the radio while you are talking to your parents. Ayan. Pamela checking Facebook while listening in the class. Alright, kindly disregard this. It's an incorrect label. It should be passive listening. So it has two categories as well. Emphatic or therapeutic listening. This kind of listening is something that you do to relieve yourself from anxiety and tension. So somehow now, if you're not feeling well, if you're feeling under the weather, you listen as an output of pent up emotions. Maybe you're feeling emotional and there's no way for you to translate that or to say it verbally, express yourself verbally. You listen to music in order to express yourself. So, this kind of listening does not necessarily have to be something you do to analyze, appreciate, or judge. Whereas, appreciative listening or emotional involves listening for pleasure, entertainment, or enjoyment. Okay? The moment you find happiness and enjoyment in listening to a particular sound that you do it over and over again repeatedly in an engaged manner, that is already appreciative listening. So the difference between appreciative and emphatic listening is that in the first example, okay, when you use music in relation to your stress, you just want to express yourself through listening to music. That is therapeutic listening. It acts as a stress reliever. Whereas for appreciative listening, you're trying to vibe, you're trying to sway in the music, you listen for pleasure, entertainment, or enjoyment. That is appreciative listening. All right. Now, I asked you a while ago regarding the issues and the problems you might have that might hinder you from listening. We will talk about that next. The ideal situation is that for us to be active listeners 100% of the time. But even studies mentioned a while ago that that's not always the case. The reality is there are certain situations or preconceived notions that acts as barriers in listening. There are things that sometimes are out of our control, and there are instances wherein it's in our control. No? There are situations in our control that become barriers when we are listening. And the first one is the noise. So just like the examples you mentioned a while ago, a noise pertains to any kind of sensory stimuli that affects the transmission of messages, diba? As we have studied in the communication process. Now there are also categories in there are categories of noise, external and internal. When we say external, these are the kinds of noise that come from physical objects like radio, roosters, okay, talking people talking at the background, things that disturb you and prevents you from giving your complete focus and attention to what you're doing or to what you're listening to. These are the sounds you hear, no, that you cannot control. Whereas internal noise pertains to emotional or mental distractions that interfere with your attention while listening. So maybe you're listening to a lecture but you find yourself suddenly daydreaming. Oh, all right. You're thinking about your what food you'll eat for lunch. Ganon. Okay? Or maybe you're prejudiced against the speaker. All right? Sometimes there are also cases in which we are trying to predict or anticipate what's going to come up next. All of these things can affect your focus, but all of these are happening inside your head. Therefore, these are called internal noise. Okay. Next, another barrier that can deter us from listening properly is understanding ourselves, understanding yourself, right? Sometimes there are preconceived notions about yourself that will prevent you from getting the entirety of the message. What is that preconceived notion? Okay, we're referring to how you feel about the speaker and the topic. For example, okay, for you the topic is boring, which is why um, it becomes a barrier in the listening process. So you tend to space out, you tune out whatever you're listening to. Yan. You just hear certain parts which catches your interest. So this is also called selective hearing. Next to understanding yourself, of course, there's understanding others. This one naman, opposite to understanding yourself, pertains to preconceived notions or beliefs about others. So this involves judging the speaker according to voice quality, gestures, appearance, or social standing. So instead of focusing on the message, you're focusing on these things instead. Okay? So you become preoccupied in criticizing the way they look or sound, which makes you either an attentive listener or someone who totally disregards the messages coming from the speaker. So because of all of these things, your focus becomes divided. All right. Those are the three barriers in listening. Over here we have more examples of internal and external noise for clarification, and which can be referred to as extrinsic and intrinsic noise. All right. Let's first go with intrinsic noise, something that you can feel, something that affects you on a mental state. An example of that is if you are feeling pain or hunger, you might find it difficult to focus on what the speaker is talking about. When you have a family problem, okay, it might distract you from listening. The same goes for financial problem. Or if you're afraid of the teacher, you lack sleeplessness. You're very constant self focus. Okay. Okay, this one, a lot of people are guilty about this, no? You're so eager to talk, meaning to say, instead of listening to the speaker, you're already thinking about what you would say next. That is an example of internal noise. Lack of information or knowledge of the topic is also an internal noise or intrinsic noise. And also your beliefs. All of these things can hinder you from listening well, intrinsically. For extrinsic noise, okay, these are the things that are out of our control, outside us, outside our person. It could be that the room is either hot or cold. We cannot control if the neighbors are noisy, if our chair is uncomfortable, when there are passing jeeps and buses outside the windows, okay? When your classmate is fidgeting with his pen, or if the air conditioner is old and very noisy, if the speaker isn't very engaging, or if the speaker's style is something that we do not particularly like. Okay? Lastly, amount of information transmitted. All of this can hinder us from becoming better listeners. All of these are examples of noise. So, in order to listen well, yan, kasi we mentioned a while ago that listening is a skill that can be developed. There are habits that we can use in order to improve our listening skills. Okay. But before we proceed to that, I would like to ask everyone, no? What do you think would help you to become better listeners? What could you do in order to become a better listener? What are the things that you could do in order to become a better listener? Just off the top of your head. All right. For girly, it is important to respect, no? Learn how to respect people and their opinions. So be conscious that there are differences in terms of opinions of different people. For Rain and for John Marley, it's to focus on the person who is talking. All right, let's see if your answers are present in our guide in improving our listening skills. Okay. The first one, okay, the first step is to stop talking. When somebody is talking, stop talking. Do not interrupt and let them finish what they are saying. It is rude to talk while somebody else is speaking. Well, this is, I don't know, this is basic etiquette. When someone is talking, we don't talk. Okay, we do not interrupt as much as possible. No. Sometimes kasi when, especially when a specific subject is engaging, no, we find ourselves wanting to share our experiences also. And in our eagerness, we could be interjecting when someone else is talking. So in order to improve our listening skills, stop talking first. Okay. Pamela Nicole mentions to limit judgments here in the chat box. Let's see if that will appear in our guide in a bit. Okay, but the second one is to focus or concentrate on your task, which is, of course, to listen. Refrain from thinking about anything else other than what the speaker is talking about. Focus on the speaker and his message. Okay. Third, don't criticize the speaker. In what sense? There may be times wherein you don't like how the speaker looks. You don't like how they dress. It could be they're wearing very vibrant colors that clashes. All right. You don't like how they sound. But always remember that the message that the speaker will be sharing or giving is more important than how they sound or how they look. Focus on the message and not how the speaker looks or dresses or sound. The next one, remove distractions. In order to focus on what is being said, we should remove distractions. So what are those distractions that we are mentioning? All right. For example, okay, there's a stack of paper in front of us. We're shuffling it. When we tap our finger or pen on the table, when we fidget too much, okay, those are examples of distractions. So as much as possible, if we would like to be an active listener, try not to fidget too much. Try to avoid distractions. Next, avoid emotional reactions. We have to empathize. Be courteous and respect the speaker. How? By thinking not about yourself, but putting yourself in their shoes. So try to see things from their perspective. Next to that, right, be patient. There are instances wherein the speaker might pause. You don't have to interrupt if that happens. Okay? So, practice number 5, put yourself in their shoes. Sometimes it takes a bit of time to construct your thoughts and verbalize them. So, let them finish what they are saying. Speaking is a skill, right? And since it's a skill, it's something that can be developed. It is a continuous, or developing it is a continuous process. Meaning to say, there's no limit as to the growth, no, of a person in terms of speaking. So in times where you see a speaker pause, you see the speaker stutter, you don't have to interrupt. Okay? Give them time to finish what they are saying. Next, guard against prejudice. Be aware if you already have a prejudice against a person or a topic. When we say prejudice, it's a preconceived notion. There is already a judgment before listening to the person who is speaking. Try to avoid focusing on annoying mannerisms or how they look like. Always focus on the message and not how they delivered the message to you. Okay, since we're talking about focusing on the message, number 8, uh, focus on main points. There is no need to remember everything word for word. All right, just focus on the ideas that you pick up. Okay, so don't feel so pressured to remember everything. Kasi being pressured, that's an example of a noise. So try to relax yourself. And then if you're still finding it hard to understand what is being said just by listening, well then, the suggestion for number 9 mentions to take down notes. Okay? You can develop your own system of note taking. Do it in a way that is comfortable to you, that is understandable to you. Okay? In order to make it second nature as you listen. That will make you an effective listener. Jot down important things. And lastly, watch for verbal and nonverbal communication. So, since not everything is spoken, there are also nonverbal communication like gestures, facial expressions, eye movement. All of these add to the meaning of the message. So, ayan. Just be conscious about this. Watch out for this. It could signal how confident or nervous the speaker is. It could affect how you perceive the message. So, again, just look out for nonverbal cues, but do not focus on them. Use them as an aid in interpreting the message, but do not focus your entire concentration on them. All right? So there. Actually, that's the end of our lesson for today, no? Do you